QT Academy, empowering teachers to empower each other.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 7th in our series of Quality Teaching Academy member webinars on the elements of the quality teaching model. This afternoon, we're focusing on higher order thinking. If we haven't already met, my name is Beth Filippo, and I'm one of the Quality Teaching Rounds advisors. My fellow advisors, Michelle Ware, Rob Barter, and Kate Shawland, have helped me put together what we hope is a clear explanation of the element of higher order thinking. We're all experienced teachers from across the government and independent school systems, both primary and high school, and we're joined as well by colleagues from the Teachers and Teaching Research Centre here at the University of Newcastle. I can also see we're joined by a couple of our advisors who've moved back into school, so the pressure's on to deliver a good webinar today. For your information, this webinar will be recorded so that we can pop it onto the Quality Teaching Academy website. Just want to check in maybe with a couple of thumbs up if the sound and technology is going okay for you. Yes? No? Yes? Great. Thank you. I can see there's a few of you in staff rooms, so I'm hoping it's broadcasting well enough for you. All right, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are broadcasting on the unceded lands of the Pambalong clan of the Awabakal people and the Newcastle University Callaghan campus. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and welcome any Indigenous colleagues joining us today. We invite you to add your land in the chat or even beside your name like it is for mine. In today's 30-minute webinar, we're going to clarify what the element higher order thinking is and what it isn't. We'll provide some examples of what this element looks like in different subject areas and then have time for a few questions at the end. Sorry, I'd invite you to jot down any questions you have as we go along, and if I haven't answered them during the webinar, then we can unmute at the end and do our best to answer them then. We really appreciate you giving up your precious time to learn more about the model, so we have limited it to 30 minutes, but we'll see how we go at the end. Higher order thinking sits within the intellectual quality dimension of the model, and I know some of you have extensive experience with the model and know about higher order thinking, but I also know there are some people new to the model joining us today that have come in through varying projects. So we're going to have a quite comprehensive dive into higher order thinking. And when we think about this element, we're considering the extent to which students are regularly engaged in thinking that requires them to organise, reorganise, apply, analyse, synthesise and evaluate knowledge and information. Really, it's about the kind of thinking that students are engaged in and whether this thinking is linked to key ideas and concepts addressed in the lesson. By engaging in higher order thinking skills connected to big ideas, we can increase the value of and enrich student learning. Having said that, it's important to acknowledge that lower order thinking and routine practice and drill certainly does have a place, and we will come back to that a little bit later. Sorry, my slides aren't behaving. So when we think of higher order thinking, we automatically think about Benjamin Bloom or Bloom's taxonomy, which is still around today and has had a number of revisions over the years. The taxonomy describes thinking that moves from routine thinking through to sophisticated and analytical thought. Higher order thinking skills go beyond basic observation of facts and memorisation. The language of Bloom's can be seen clearly in this element of the model when students engage in manipulating information, drawing conclusions, providing justifications, transferring knowledge, solving problems, and creating new meanings, for example. Many of you would be aware that the work by US researcher Fred Newman forms the foundation of the quality teaching model as we know it. Higher order thinking also features prominently in Newman and his colleagues' work on authentic pedagogy and authentic achievement from the 1990s. And typically much of the research around intellectual quality includes reference to designing learning experiences that are challenging and rigorous for students. We can clearly see the link between Newman's work and the current version of the quality teaching model. Before we look at some specific examples from different subject areas, let's address some common misconceptions about higher order thinking. The first one is that if students engage in higher order thinking activities, then intellectual quality is high. Higher order thinking isn't synonymous with intellectual quality, but rather an opportunity for students to manipulate information that can further transform its meaning. If an activity involves higher order thinking busy work or is not connected to the deep knowledge of the lesson, then intellectual quality might not be enhanced. It's not about the quality of the thinking, it's about the quality of the ideas. You can have higher order thinking about meaningless stuff. The next one is that higher order thinking is only relevant for higher achieving students. And we've often come across situations where higher order thinking activities have been reserved for higher achieving classes or students. In other words, saving quality pedagogy for those perceived to be more able. And this is where we can see a clear link between higher order thinking and the element of high expectations. The model works on the premise that all students can achieve when provided with appropriate or the right support. So finding ways of extending thinking that meets students at their point of need is a valuable way to build students' capacity to think critically. In the case of younger students or those with complex learning needs, greater scaffolding might be required to help them answer the why questions or the because statements, and this could include providing a list of options in words or in images. Next one is that lower order thinking isn't important. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the webinar, but let's have a closer look at this misconception. We know that lower order thinking is essential to build the foundations for understanding. And of course, there are lessons or parts of lessons that do set the scene for a topic where critical information needs to be reinforced or where students need to rehearse or practice essential skills. However, unless we provide opportunities for students to engage in higher order thinking, it's unlikely that they will develop or be able to demonstrate a deep understanding of important concepts and ideas. And the last one is that thinking becomes higher order by increasing the complexity of a task or an activity. Thinking doesn't necessarily become higher order just by increasing the complexity of the task. Lower order thinking can still be the focus of complex activities if, for example, students only need to follow pre-specified steps and routines, employ algorithms, or write variations on sentence patterns in a rote fashion. Again, it's the quality of the ideas that matter, not just the complexity of the activities. So many of you are familiar with our classroom practice guide, and here you can see the layout of higher order thinking on the double page in the classroom practice guide. And you can see on the left, we have the statements that detail high and low presence of higher order thinking, and we have the coding scale. And on the right-hand side, we have these notes and suggestions, and these can really help to clarify your understanding of an element and get you thinking about ways you can enhance that element in your lessons and assessment activities. This section's also really helpful when you're coding lessons. I had someone in a workshop just the other day say those notes and suggestions really helped me to clarify the evidence I was giving when I was coding higher order thinking. So there's some great practical suggestions here for tweaks you can make to practice to increase higher order thinking. So this is how the classroom practice guide describes a high presence of higher order thinking. It says higher order thinking requires students to manipulate information and ideas in ways that transform their meanings and implications. This transformation occurs when students combine facts and ideas in order to synthesize, generalize, explain, hypothesize, or arrive at some conclusion or interpretation. Manipulating information and ideas through these processes allows students to solve problems and create new, for them, meanings and understandings. When students demonstrate higher order thinking, they may also generate unexpected concepts, ideas and products which can take learning in new directions. And similarly, the assessment practice guide describes a task high in higher order thinking, and it requires those same sort of skills, manipulating information, transforming when students combine facts in order to synthesize, tasks that require students to manipulate information and ideas to solve problems and create new meanings. So the assessment practice guide and the classroom practice guide contain those same verbs that students are required to do. And if we have a look at the coding scale for higher order thinking and then how that translates into a couple of examples, The bolded statement sitting above the coding scale provides us with the spirit of the element, which you would be familiar with if you've been part of quality teaching rounds. To what extent are students regularly engaged in thinking that requires them to organise, reorganise, apply, analyse, synthesise and evaluate knowledge and information? And if we have a look at those codes, coding a 1, students demonstrate only lower order thinking. So they're either receiving and reciting knowledge, routine practice, simple reproduction of knowledge. If you code a 2, students primarily demonstrate lower order, but at some point, at least some students perform higher order thinking. To code a 3, students primarily demonstrate routine lower order thinking. A good share of the lesson, there is at least one significant question or activity in which most students perform some higher order thinking. To code a 4, most students demonstrate higher order thinking in at least one major activity that occupies a substantial portion of the lesson. And to code a 5, all students, almost all of the time, demonstrate higher order thinking. When we think about a lesson or an activity that's predominantly a lower order thinking lesson, it only takes a small tweak, one question or activity that requires some higher order thinking to move that code from a 1 to a 3. So thinking about small tweaks like this can help to enhance student understanding. So we're going to have a look at a science and technology lesson around energy efficiency and the strategies that you can use in a home to reduce your carbon footprint. This particular example could be done partly at school or part of a home project, but we're looking at students being asked to consider energy efficient strategies in their activity. So at a 1, students are only required to think simplistically. This might mean that students complete a worksheet which asks them to circle from a list of options the design considerations that could increase the energy efficiency of a house. At a 2, students are still recalling pre-taught knowledge in a simple way, but are asked to create a drawing as a minor diversion. This might mean that students complete the workshop, then as an option, they may select one of those energy efficient designs and draw a picture of it. At a 3, students are still primarily doing lower order thinking in learning about energy efficient strategies. However, there is a significant task for students to then discuss what they've learned. So this might involve learning about those strategies, taking notes about their effectiveness, and then in small groups discussing the pros and cons of the various strategies, including things such as cost. At a 4, we're moving to most students and a substantial portion of the lesson being focused on one or more of those higher order thinking verbs. The task might be to create a design of an energy efficient house featuring at least 3 of the strategies based on information provided in class and individual research. In pairs, they evaluate each other's designs and provide peer feedback based on a checklist provided by the teacher. And to code a 5, students are fully immersed in a lesson or a task that requires all students to demonstrate higher order thinking. And this might look like each student designing and creating a model of an energy efficient house, providing detailed written justification for each design inclusion. They're also required to identify design challenges and provide possible solutions and alternatives. Students present their models to the class and respond to questions from their peers. You can see here, to code a 5, students are required to justify their decisions, provide solutions to problems, and have a deep enough understanding of their design choices to be able to answer questions from their peers. Here are some other examples of small tweaks that could be made to lessons to increase the higher order thinking opportunities. A common maths question might be to find the volume of a box with a height of 3 centimetres, width of 5 centimetres and length of 10 centimetres. And students might be required to complete 5 of these questions with different numbers. Completing these repetitive drill style questions is relatively lower order thinking. However, if we give students the solution and ask them to create a box that has, for example, a volume of 150 cubic centimetres, then they not only have to use the algorithm, but they have to apply it in an unfamiliar situation. So simply rewording this question now requires students to think about the knowledge they already have, but to employ higher order thinking skills to solve the problem. We might look at a food tech lesson where students are asked to name 3 functions of food packaging. This is a lower order task, regurgitating knowledge that they've been given. They might know that the packaging is used to contain the food, to preserve it, and to inform and persuade the buyer. However, if they're asked to choose a packaged food from home and explain why the materials chosen for the packaging have been used and how the package has been designed to inform and persuade consumers, then we're elevating the higher order thinking. If students are then asked to provide suggestions on how the product could be improved to be more environmentally sustainable whilst maintaining its function, then we're asking students to think more critically about the packaging and create suggestions, new meanings while considering what they already know. You might think of a stage 6 legal studies lesson. Instead of asking students to outline the key features of a Charter of Rights, students might be required to explore why a Charter of Rights might be required and find something within the Australian legal system that might be similar and make comparisons. They might then need to reach a conclusion as to whether they believe Australia needs to adopt a Charter of Rights. And another common misconception is that people sometimes assume that little kids can't do higher order thinking. In a Year 1 geography unit at my school, we looked at people and places. Students are asked to design a park for local families to use. Simply asking the students to justify why they've chosen certain features to be included in that park elevated the activity to require more substantial higher order thinking for those students. This is an example of one of our short element videos. So this is one of our longer ones, but Laureate Professor Jenny Gore has filmed some 2 to 3 minute short video element descriptors, and these are available on our website.
Higher order thinking refers to activities such as analysing, evaluating and creating, in contrast to lower order thinking, which involves recalling, recounting and rote learning. It's important to acknowledge that lower order thinking is a necessary part of teaching and learning. Sometimes students simply need to practice things over and over, whether it's mathematical problems, correct letter formation, an art technique, or throwing a shot put. However, if students only do lower order thinking, their attention often wavers. It's like sitting on a plane and being told the safety instructions, where most of us with travel experience tune out. It's the same kind of issue in classrooms. If students are just doing the low-level stuff, they tune out. As teachers, we want to extend and challenge students with the kind of thinking that will achieve deeper intellectual engagement. So it's about ensuring higher order thinking occurs in every lesson. Attention to higher order thinking helps us to see how the elements fit together in the quality teaching model. While important, higher order thinking alone is not enough to ensure intellectual quality. For example, students might be engaged in higher order thinking, but if it's disconnected from the key concepts, what you really want the students to learn, it can just be busy work. An example would be to have students design a poster for saving rainforests. That's a higher order thinking activity. But the purpose of the activity needs to be clear. Students could be asked to describe how their poster communicates and is connected with concepts such as sustainability or deforestation. Or in an art lesson, they might be asked to explain the visual techniques and imagery they've used to engage and influence their audience. We could get students to follow a set of instructions to construct a piece of furniture, a complex activity. But how does this connect to what we want them to learn? Is it about the building task, the design elements, or the implications of working with different materials? Here, we link back to the idea of deep knowledge and that it's not just about the quality of the thinking, but the quality of the ideas that really matters.
So you can see here on our Quality Teaching Academy website, the element videos are all listed here. You can see higher order thinking is already there, ready to go. And these are a great resource to use in staff meetings when you just want a little 2 or 3 minute refresher on things that are happening in the model, but you don't want to take up too much time on your agenda. Coming up, we have another element webinar on the Thursday, the 13th of June, and we'll be unpacking the engagement element in that one. If you're looking for other ways to engage with the quality teaching model, we have other professional development opportunities. We have our 2-day foundational workshop, as well as an assessment practice and a programming design workshop. We have tailored workshops that we can provide for your school for staff development days. And we have these webinars available as well. As members of our Quality Teaching Academy, you have access to all of those. We also have a new a $5 million federally funded program happening called Strengthening Induction, which aims to support our early career teachers. I'm not going to go into it a great deal, but if you have early career teachers in your school and you're interested in getting some teachers trained in quality teaching rounds, this is a really great way to engage with the training and start the rounds process happening in your school to support your early career and, of course, your later career teachers as well. And our other exciting news is our Quality Teaching and Practice conference that's coming up in Sydney on the 3rd or 4th of June in the Novotel at Sydney Olympic Park. So registrations for that are available now and also on our website. Alrighty, so I'm just going to check the chat, see if there's any questions in there, but if there's anyone who would be interested in asking a question, now's a great time. No more questions?
Hi Beth, how are you going?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm going to throw a spanner in the works here. Lots of New South Wales public schools would be using the department units of work.
Yes.
Yes. And just curious about what you might have heard in workshops about how people are extending higher order thinking using the units.
In terms of actual higher order thinking, I've not heard a lot. I've had sort of mixed reviews on the new units. I haven't actually taught them because I started here last year, so I haven't actually taught them. I have heard mixed reports in terms of explicit teaching and not the opportunity to do much higher order thinking. But I've also heard of schools adapting those units because they think it's important. So I certainly Michelle has talked to quite a few schools about how those units aren't really designed to be taught the way they come across as being taught. So I do know of people who are working hard to increase the higher order thinking. Are you teaching them, Nicole?
We are, yeah, we are. And that's what we're finding. We really have to go beyond the scope of what is included.
Yes, yeah, that's the impression I'm getting, definitely. Certainly easier in some subject areas than the others, I would imagine.
Definitely.
Thanks, Nicole. Anyone else? Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. You can actually email the Academy if you have any further questions, or you can email me, beth.filippo@newcastle.edu.au. And we are more than happy to answer any questions you have and provide support to you if needed. Thank you everyone for attending, and I'll have a lovely afternoon. See you later.